For those that consider murder mystery research to be a hobby, it's humanly impossible to learn about every mystery in the last 100 years. No matter how deep you dig, there will always be a supply of unpopular cases that never made their way to the headlines. These are 5 mysteries you've probably never heard of. Number 5. As you'd expect, this case does have some information available online. However, it wasn't considered a prominent case during its time, and as the years have passed by, it's grown even more unpopular and mysterious. 54-year-old Effie MacDonald was working as a maid at the Bangor House, a successful and admired hotel in Boston, where she lost her life in 1965. She was last seen around 12:30 p.m. on March 18th, until her body was later found by a fellow employee. This person was performing their usual duties when they entered an empty room on the 3rd floor and found Effie deceased. Her clothes had been ripped off of her, and there were signs of assault and foul play that even the average person couldn't deny. Further investigation and an autopsy confirmed the obvious. Effie had been attacked. The perpetrator took her life by restricting her breathing with her own nylon stockings, as well as physically harming her. The details of her passing were apparently similar to the work of a notorious serial killer, the Boston Strangler. Given the time and location of the crime, many believed the unknown villain was to blame. As more details were discovered, though, that theory was dismissed and detectives had to look elsewhere for suspects. According to her friends and relatives, Effie was a kind, caring, and unproblematic woman without an evil bone in her body. She had no known enemies. Members of the hotel staff were cleared either for having an alibi or lack of evidence against them. In fact, very little evidence at all was available in this case, which caused detectives to hit a dead end very early on. Some hotel guests reported a suspicious man pacing the halls of the hotel around the time the crime was committed, but there was no evidence of this suspect existing, and there was certainly no way to track him down based on those loose witness descriptions. Years after the case went cold, rumors began to circulate that police had apprehended a creepy man they believed was responsible, but they lacked the necessary evidence to carry on with the conviction. Of course, these are just rumors, and it's unclear if they possess any credibility. Despite the fact that this tragedy happened at a landmark of the city, given Effie's age and the status of the case, it was hardly covered in the news. It was never reopened after going cold. It remains one of Maine's biggest unsolved mysteries, but it still lacks the attention it deserves. Number 4. On June 5th, 1992, 29-year-old Mario Amato set out for a fun beach trip with his girlfriend Paula and his brother Joe and Joe's girlfriend Debbie. The group intended on enjoying their mini vacation with a day full of sunshine and good times, but sadly that wasn't how the fateful day played out. The group traveled from Los Angeles, California to Rosarito Beach in Mexico, arriving at the beach around 1 a.m. that night. The group hung out until about 3:30 a.m. before going to bed. However, Joe and Debbie were woken up at about 7 a.m. to Mario busting into the room and claiming he wanted to leave because he was in a serious fight with Paula. Eventually, the fight sizzled out and everyone went back to bed. The next day, though, Joe and Debbie went for a drive while Mario and Paula stayed at the condo to drink, which led to another fight. This time, the cops were called and Mario was arrested for public drunkenness. Official reports claim that he was taken to the station and detained, but no charges were filed. When Joe and Debbie returned that evening, a pair of officers informed them that Mario was deceased. They insisted that he tied his shirt around his neck, with the other end fastened around a metal pole 3 feet off the ground. Joe was immediately alarmed not only by the loss of his brother, but by the story he was given. He didn't believe his brother would do such a thing, and the entire setup seemed impossible, given the location and the height of the bar. Sadly, Joe was defenseless against the law and had to leave his brother's remains behind when the group returned to Los Angeles. Detectives claimed they wanted to perform their own autopsy before releasing the body. A week later, the results implied that Mario passed away due to lack of oxygen to his brain, which confirmed the reports that he did this himself. Joe still didn't believe what he was being told and contacted Congressman Howard Berman. While this story had not been heavily covered by the media, Berman was aware of the situation and agreed with Joe that something suspicious was going on. Another series of autopsies were performed by California medical examiners, and it was discovered that Mario suffered from serious injuries in his upper abdomen and liver as though he had been beaten. This information implied foul play, but it also confirmed that Mario would not have been able to tie himself up, because he would have been very weak and immobile. Berman announced that Mario's death should be ruled as a murder. While Joe and his family believed that the Mexican police were to blame, there wasn't enough evidence in any direction for the case to move forward, and it remains a mystery to this day. Number 3. The cases that attract the most media coverage usually involve prominent community members, public figures, gruesome conditions, or various other special details that sets them aside from the rest. That's likely why the case of Pamela Webb didn't garner much coverage, neither when it occurred or now. Although the case is tragic and Pamela was a human being just like any other, the conditions of her case were simple, without many twists and turns, some have said. 32-year-old Pamela Webb of Winthrop, Maine, was last seen alive on July 1, 1989. On that day, Pamela and her dog loaded into her 1981 blue Chevy pickup truck, intending to travel to Mason, New Hampshire, to visit Pamela's longtime boyfriend. The following morning, when she failed to arrive, her boyfriend contacted police to file a missing persons report. The case was barely mentioned in the media, but locals were alerted to the ongoing search, and calls suddenly poured into a nearby station. There were somewhere between 75 to 100 witnesses that called in and shared that they had seen her truck pulled over on the side of a highway with possible flat tires. That same day, officers reported to the location of the truck and confirmed that it was Pamela's. Case files stated that the passenger rear tire was flat, a spare tire was stood up against the tailgate, and bloodstains suggesting foul play covered the passenger seat. Her dog was also found in the front seat of the truck, but he was healthy and alive. This led detectives to believe that the attack happened more recently than they originally assumed. On July 18, 1989, a passerby found Pamela's remains in a wooded area off the side of a busy main street. The medical examiner confirmed the skeleton belonged to the missing woman and provided that she passed away due to violence of an unknown nature, meaning that no specific wounds were found, but certain details suggested she could have been attacked. No suspects were ever identified, and the case quickly went cold. Attention was shifted elsewhere, and eventually the case was overall forgotten by the public eye. To this day, it remains a mystery. Number 2. Jack Davis Jr. was a 20-year-old sophomore student at Indiana University of Pennsylvania when he vanished on October 16, 1987. On that day, which would ultimately become the last day Jack was seen alive, he went to a Friday night party with his fraternity brothers. Witness reports claim that during that short time Jack was at the party, everything about him seemed normal. He apparently got bored of the scenery though and left the party to go to a bar in downtown Indiana. This fact is known thanks to reports from bartenders and bouncers. They couldn't provide much information on when or how he left the bar though. Either way, he never returned to his apartment and his friends worried he was missing. Yet they failed to file a report. Instead, Jack's body was found on October 21st in a stairwell of the university. Medical exams were performed on his remains, and an official report stated that he passed away due to asphyxiation. Police pieced together a story in which Jack drunkenly hid in the stairwell to relieve his bladder early Saturday morning. He then apparently fell and passed out on the ground before vomiting in his sleep and choking himself. It was ruled an accident, causing detectives and media to move on. There were numerous discrepancies in the case though, and Jack's loved ones didn't give up that easily. A talented independent pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht, took on the case 2 years later after being contacted by the family. The doctor identified many red flags off the start. He pointed out that Jack's body allegedly went unnoticed in the stairwell for at least 5 days. While this route wasn't frequently used by students, it wasn't desolate either, meaning someone would have had to have noticed him over the course of that time. Also, if Jack was drunk like officials stated, he likely wouldn't have worried about hiding while urinating. Next, the report found no traces of alcohol in Jack's blood, even though he was supposedly dangerously intoxicated. The original report also stated that Jack choked on pieces of food and his vomit, but no food particles were found in his throat or lungs. Also, when Jack went out on Friday night, he wasn't even clean shaven, but when his remains were found, he had significant hair growth, suggesting that he didn't pass away on Saturday morning. The doctor also noted that the original examiner didn't bother opening the victim's skull. The doctor requested that Jack's body be exhumed so he could perform a more thorough autopsy, in which he found 3 fractures to his skull. The doctor also performed further crime scene investigation and collected student reports. This revealed that the stairwell was empty 2 days before Jack was found, and that 1 day before he was found, there had been heavy rain, yet his clothes were dry. The doctor concluded that Jack had been attacked and then dumped in the stairwell on the same day that he was found. This information caused authorities to bust the case back open in 1990. Despite all of this fresh information, there still wasn't enough evidence to even begin the process of locating a suspect. Jack's cause of death was officially reclassified, but the now cold case was quickly shut again and returned to a shelf where it collects dust to this day. Number 1. 20-year-old Arnold Arkham Bo and 19-year-old Ruby Brugger were a happy couple from Lake Andes, South Dakota. They had an infant son together and were described as happy, healthy, and loving individuals. However, they frequently had an itch for hard partying, which ultimately got them in trouble. On December 11, 1992, Ruby's cousin Tracy joined the couple for a night out on the town, filled with heavy drinking and partying. Everything seemed normal and fine, according to witnesses. But after leaving the bar scene, the trio went to Ruby's father's house to pick up their child. They were still heavily intoxicated, so her father insisted that the child stay with him for the night, while they went home to get some rest and sober up. After leaving his house, the trio was involved in a tragic car wreck. Officers concluded that Arnold, who was driving, threw the car off the road into a frozen ditch for reasons unknown. The car flipped with the three of them inside, but Arnold managed to get out and left the women behind. A short time later, Ruby crawled out and ran off without offering Tracy a hand. Emergency services arrived at the scene a short time later and were able to save Tracy's life. She explained the series of events she had just endured, and a manhunt was issued for Arnold and Ruby because it seemed as though they fled the scene to avoid consequences of driving under the influence. Under the impression that the couple were runaway criminals, the hunt continued for several months. It didn't gain much media attention though, and detectives assumed that was why no tips or sightings had been reported. A few months later, it became clear exactly why they couldn't find the wanted pair. In March of 1993, a passerby noticed a body in a frozen ditch just a few miles from where the car wreck had occurred. The ditch was melted down and the remains were confirmed to be Ruby's. She was missing her glasses and her shoes, but her clothes were untouched. She was in an advanced state of decay despite the ice surrounding her body. As forensics melted more of the ditch, they found Arnold's remains deeper within. He was in a much better condition, but it's unclear if it was due to his death happening later or the simple fact that he was deeper in the ice. An autopsy report showed that they both passed due to exposure, but at different times. At first, it was easy to theorize that the couple faced their fate after fleeing the scene that night. However, a series of important details dismissed that notion. A lump of Ruby's hair was found outside of the ditch near the road. Investigators believed that it wouldn't have stayed in the same spot for so long near the busy street. A set of keys were found in Arnold's pocket, which unlocked a car and two houses, but investigators could not locate which ones. Finally, witnesses had reported seeing the couple at a bar on New Year's Eve, which was 3 weeks after the car crash. It was determined that foul play was to blame, but no leads or details were ever unearthed, and the whole case still remains a mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this narration, maybe consider checking out my personal channel at youtube.com/ty_knots. And if you like this video, be sure to click that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future videos.